At this place in history, we're at the Vermont State Fairgrounds in Rutland with Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins. What brings us here today, Steve?
Amanda, we are going to talk about one of Vermont's pioneering aviators and a somewhat tragic story. Take yourself back to 1913. So the grounds look like this, and you have this brand spanking new invention, the airplane, circling overhead, and hundreds of people from all around the state are coming here to see these daredevils flying airplanes. So we're going to talk about George Schmidt, and this is a guy who grew up in Rutland, son of a German immigrant baker who ran the Marble City Bakery here in town. Had an aptitude for mechanics, but really he got this bug for flying, even at an early age. So he was 11 years old when the Wright brothers in 1903 made that first air flight. And then like the next year, the kid is playing with gliders and little airplanes. And by the time he was 18, he's building his own gliders. They're pulling behind automobiles on this very racetrack in Rutland. So really loved to fly. Dropped out of technical school because he wanted to go fly an airplane. And so George Schmidt took lessons on learning how to fly an airplane and ended up finding a business partner and creating a company to do exhibition airplane flights. They were based out of New York City and Brooklyn, and they barnstormed all over the United States, flying airplanes at fairs and festivals. He wanted to be the first guy to fly an airplane in Vermont. He wasn't. A few came before him, and so he said, great, I'm going to be the first guy to fly an airplane in my hometown in Rutland at the Vermont State Fair. Couldn't quite do it. His airplane didn't work, so he was beaten out. But in 1912, he came here and he flew exhibition flights all around this airfield. You know, native son comes home. Everybody loved it. They took rides with him throughout the day, and looking at the city from the sky just was really interesting for them. He went on a barnstorming tour of the Caribbean in the winter of 1912 into 1913 and kind of the northern coast of South America. And his real claim to fame was he was the first aviator to fly from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Of course, he did that flying over the Isthmus of Panama, so it was that narrow part. But yeah, so there was a record for him for flying over that. By the end of that winter season in June of 1913, he had come back to the United States and started the summer season here. He came back in the fall. Another stunt that he did here in Rutland that year was to do the first air mail delivery in the state of Vermont. So the post office set up a little remote post office at the fairgrounds. People could bring their letters. It was canceled at that remote office. He took it up in his airplane and then dropped it onto the roof or next to the post office in Rutland City. So there was an airmail delivery from the fairgrounds, but the first in Vermont, 69th in the United States. This trip to the fair in 1913 did end in tragedy. So it was a second day of the fair, or second day flying at the fair on September 2nd. He's up flying. He had a young lawyer from Rutland up with him. We're not sure exactly what happened, but he lost control of the airplane. And in front of hundreds and hundreds of people watching this over here, he crashed. So it goes into a spiral. The airplane crashes on the fairgrounds, and George Schmidt is crushed by the radiator from the airplane. The lawyer who was with him lived, survived the crash, but he was the first air fatality in the state of Vermont on September 2nd, 1913. But we'll remember him as this tall, handsome aviator, forever 21 years old, flying his airplane above the Rutland State Fairgrounds.
At the Vermont State Fairgrounds in Rutland at this place in history.